When my daughter Emily announced she was getting married, my heart should have been bursting with joy. Instead, I felt like someone had slipped a dagger between my ribs. She didn't call me to share the news. She didn't even send a cheerful photo of the ring. No, I found out through Facebook. 100 likes, 50 congratulations, and there she was, grinning next to Nathan, the man she'd been dating for barely a year. And beneath the photo, the caption that hollowed me out: "Can't wait to marry my soulmate and start our forever." I wanted to believe I'd been left out by accident. Maybe the phone call was coming later. Maybe she'd been too busy basking in attention. But the silence stretched on, and the days bled together until my hope rotted away. Finally, I swallowed my pride and called her myself. "Emily," I said, forcing cheer into my voice, "I saw the wonderful news. Congratulations, sweetheart." On the other end, there was a pause. Too long. Then a clipped, "Thanks, Mom." Not Mommy, not Mama, just Mom, as if the word itself was a formality. We danced around pleasantries for a few minutes until I asked the question burning holes in my throat. "So, when's the date? I'll need to clear my schedule." Another pause. This one sharpened like glass. "Mom," she said finally, "about the wedding. Nathan and I have been talking. His family is, well, very particular about appearances. They want things elegant, seamless, you know?" I frowned. "I don't follow." She inhaled sharply, like she was bracing for impact. "It might be better if you didn't come." My stomach dropped. "Didn't come? Emily, I'm your mother." "It's just..." Her voice faltered, but not from guilt, from irritation. "You don't really fit the image we're going for. Nathan's parents are very classy. They have high standards. You're not exactly polished." There it was. I wasn't welcome at my own daughter's wedding because I was too embarrassing for her new family. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I could hear my pulse in my ears. "So let me get this straight," I whispered. "You'd rather protect your fiancé's parents from being uncomfortable than have your own mother at the most important day of your life?" "Please don't make this harder than it has to be," she snapped. "We'll send you photos afterward." And then she hung up. I sat in silence, the phone still pressed to my ear, staring at the wall as if the paint would offer answers. I raised this girl. I worked 2 jobs to pay her tuition. I pawned jewelry to cover her rent in college. And now, because I wasn't polished enough, I was being cast aside like trash. My grief burned, but under the ashes, something else stirred. Something hotter, sharper. If she thought she could humiliate me, she was mistaken. Because I don't take humiliation lying down. And I was about to teach my daughter, and her new husband, a lesson neither of them would ever forget. For 3 days after that phone call, I wandered my empty house like a ghost. I'd catch myself setting 2 coffee cups out of habit, then remember there was no one coming to visit, no daughter to fuss over, no wedding to plan. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, found me crying in my garden on Thursday morning. "Oh, honey," she said, kneeling beside me in the dirt. "What's wrong?" I told her everything. The Facebook announcement, the phone call, the humiliation of being deemed unpolished by my own child. Mrs. Patterson's face darkened. "That little brat, after everything you've done for her." "Maybe she's right," I whispered, wiping my eyes with muddy hands. "Maybe I am embarrassing. Maybe I should just let it go." Mrs. Patterson squeezed my shoulder. "You're the strongest woman I know, Linda. But sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away." She was trying to be kind. But as she walked back to her house, shaking her head sadly, I felt something crystallize inside me. Everyone expected me to be the wounded mother, to accept this rejection with grace and dignity. They had no idea who they were dealing with. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop. If Emily wanted to play the game of appearances and social status, then I needed to understand the playing field. I started with Nathan's family, the Whitmores. On the surface, they looked impressive. Mansion in the hills, luxury cars, country club memberships. His father, Richard Whitmore, owned a commercial real estate company. His mother, Patricia, served on charity boards and hosted fundraising galas. But I'd learned long ago that often, the shinier a thing looks on the outside, the more rotten it usually is underneath. I dug deeper. Richard Whitmore's real estate company had been bleeding money for 2 years. 3 major deals had fallen through, and he'd been borrowing heavily to maintain his lifestyle. The mansion? Mortgaged to the hilt, the luxury cars? Leased. Even their country club membership was in arrears. In short, despite appearances, the Whitmores weren't really wealthy. They were drowning in debt and desperately maintaining a facade. But that was just the start. Nathan himself was even more interesting. His LinkedIn claimed he was a venture capital consultant, but after I made a few strategic phone calls to former colleagues who'd worked in the same fields or firms as he did, I found out the truth. Nathan had been fired from his last real job 8 months ago for embezzling client funds. The consulting was a cover story while he lived off credit cards and his parents' rapidly shrinking resources. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. These people had rejected me for being unpolished. They'd thought they were too classy for the woman who'd raised their future daughter-in-law. But their entire existence was built on lies and borrowed money. The irony was delicious. I was about to close my laptop when curiosity drove me to check Emily's recent activity. She was good with computers, but wasn't that great when it came to securing her social media. What I found made my blood run cold. I discovered text messages between Emily and her best friend, Sarah. Sarah had foolishly posted screenshots of on her Instagram story thinking they were private. Emily: I know Nathan's broke, but his family name opens doors. Once we're married, I can leverage their connections to get the marketing job at Blackstone and Associates. Sarah: But what about your mom? She's going to be devastated about the wedding. Emily: She'll get over it. Honestly, it's better this way. Nathan's parents would have a fit if they saw her polyester dress and grocery store jewelry. This marriage is about my future, not her feelings. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. Emily knew. She knew Nathan was broke, knew his family was fake, knew their marriage was a transaction, and she was willing to sacrifice her own mother's heart to seal the deal. I'd raised a stranger, but strangers, I'd learned, were easier to destroy than family. The next morning, I called in a favor from my past, one I'd been saving for 25 years. Linda? The voice on the phone was surprised. Wow, I haven't heard from you since we worked together at Morrison and Associates. Hello, David, I said. I need your help. David Kirkland was now a private investigator, one of the best in the city. Back when we were both paralegals, he'd been caught stealing documents to sell to opposing counsel. I could have reported him and ended his career. Instead, I'd helped him cover it up and convinced him to quit before anyone else noticed. He'd promised he'd owe me forever. Today I was collecting. What do you need? He asked. Everything you can find on Nathan Whitmore, his family, and their financial situation. I want documentation, bank records, anything that proves they're fraudulent. This about your daughter's wedding? I'd filled him in on the basic situation. Yes. Consider it done. Give me 3 days. David was as good as his word. When we met at a coffee shop across town, he slid a thick manila envelope across the table. Your instincts were spot on, Linda. Your future son-in-law is a piece of work. The documents inside painted a picture of systematic deception. Nathan hadn't just embezzled from his last job. He'd done it before, multiple times, always managing to quit just before investigations began. His parents' debt was even worse than I'd discovered. They owed money to everyone, from legitimate banks to very illegitimate loan sharks. Even more damaging were the recordings of phone calls David had obtained through his contacts. Nathan talking to his parents about playing the long game with Emily. Richard Whitmore laughing about that working-class mother and how they'd dodged a bullet by keeping me away from the wedding. But the crown jewel was a recording of Nathan on the phone with another woman. His ex-girlfriend, whom he'd been seeing throughout his entire relationship with Emily. Once I'm married, I'll have access to Emily's trust fund, he said. Her grandmother left her nearly $200,000. We can use that to pay off my debts and then, well, let's just say marriage doesn't have to be permanent. My heart raced. Emily had a trust fund from my mother that she couldn't access until she was married. Nathan wasn't just using her for status. He was planning to rob her blind and then divorce her once he'd cleaned out her inheritance. I stared at the evidence spread across my kitchen table that night. I had enough to destroy Nathan, humiliate his family, and save Emily from making the biggest mistake of her life. But did she deserve to be saved? The text messages David had uncovered were worse than what I'd seen on Instagram. Emily calling me pathetic and desperate. Laughing with friends about how I still used coupons and shopped at thrift stores. Joking about how she'd finally be able to upgrade from her embarrassing mother to her sophisticated new family. 23 years old, and she'd already learned to view love as a transaction and loyalty as weakness. Maybe she needed to learn the hard way what happened when you built your life on lies and shallow values. Maybe it was time for my daughter to feel what I'd been feeling of late, to experience exactly what it felt like to be humiliated and abandoned by the person you expected to love you the most. I reached for my phone and began making calls. If Emily wanted a wedding to remember, I'd give her one, but it wouldn't be the fairy tale she was expecting. The morning of Emily's wedding dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect September day that made you believe in new beginnings. I'd been awake since 4 a.m., not from nerves, but from anticipation. I dressed carefully, not in the polyester dress and grocery store jewelry Emily had mocked, but in an elegant navy blue suit I'd bought specifically for this occasion. Real pearls, my mother's, the ones I'd almost pawned to pay Emily's college expenses but couldn't bear to sell. My hair was professionally styled, my makeup flawless but understated. I looked polished, refined, exactly the kind of woman who belonged at a high society wedding. The irony wasn't lost on me. The ceremony was being held at the Riverside Country Club, of course, the Whitmore's home turf, where they could maintain their illusion of wealth and status. I parked my modest Honda between a Mercedes and a BMW, feeling like an imposter. But that was about to change. I walked through the ornate front doors carrying a beautifully wrapped gift box. Large, expensive-looking, tied with a satin ribbon. The kind of present that suggested thoughtfulness and generosity. The wedding coordinator, a stick-thin woman with a clipboard, spotted me immediately. "Excuse me," she said, hurrying over. "I'm sorry, but this is a private event. Are you perhaps looking for the Peterson anniversary party? That's in the smaller ballroom." I smiled warmly. "Oh no, I'm exactly where I need to be. I'm Linda Welling, Emily's mother." Her face went white. But you're not on the list." "That's quite all right," I said, continuing toward the ceremony space. "I'm sure it was just an oversight." She scrambled after me, frantically whispering into her headset. But it was too late. Guests were already turning to look, recognizing the resemblance between Emily and me, whispering among themselves. I took a seat in the back row, placing my gift box beside me, and waited. I could see staff making frantic phone calls, but no one approached me. The last thing they wanted with guests, press, and photographers there was a big photo of a scuffle in the front page news under the headline, "Bride's Mother Evicted from Whitmore Wedding." They needn't have worried. I was there to make sure that the press had something else to put on their front pages. The ceremony began 20 minutes late. Emily appeared at the back of the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than my car, but her face was soon flushed with panic. She'd spotted me immediately, and our eyes met across the crowd. I smiled and gave her a little wave. She looked like she might faint. Nathan, standing at the altar, followed her gaze and saw me too. His jaw tightened, but he managed to maintain his composure. After all, what could one uninvited mother do to disrupt such a perfect day? The ceremony proceeded without incident. Emily stumbled over her vows, clearly distracted, but most guests attributed it to wedding nerves. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, I applauded along with everyone else. During the cocktail hour, I mingled quietly. The Whitmore's friends were exactly what I'd expected. Superficial, gossipy, obsessed with appearances. They were curious about me, this mysterious woman who'd appeared uninvited, but I played the role of the gracious, slightly wounded mother perfectly. "Emily's been under so much stress planning this wedding," I told Mrs. Blackstone, whose husband owned the marketing firm Emily wanted to work for. "I think she just forgot to put me on the guest list. You know how it is with young people these days." Mrs. Blackstone tittered sympathetically. "Of course. How thoughtful of you to come anyway." Emily appeared beside us, her smile brittle as glass. "Mom," she said tightly, "what a surprise." "Darling," I said, embracing her. You look absolutely beautiful. I brought you a gift." I gestured to the box which I'd placed on the gift table with all the others. "That's very kind," she said, her voice strained. "But I thought we discussed—" Now, I interrupted, still smiling. "This is your special day. I wouldn't dream of causing any trouble. I just wanted to wish you happiness." Emily's eyes searched my face, looking for the trap she knew had to be there, but I maintained my mask of maternal goodwill. "I should go find Nathan's parents," I continued. "I'm so looking forward to meeting them properly." I left Emily standing there speechless and made my way through the crowd toward Richard and Patricia Whitmore. The reception began at sunset, golden light streaming through the country club's floor-to-ceiling windows. The Whitmores had spared no expense, or rather had borrowed heavily to create the impression that there was nothing too expensive to buy for this wedding. Crystal chandeliers, cascading flower arrangements, a 7-piece orchestra, except it just wasn't true. It was all built on lies and debt. I sat at a table in the back, having been graciously accommodated by the frazzled wedding coordinator. My gift box remained unopened on the present table, conspicuous among the smaller packages. Dinner was served. Speeches began. Nathan's best man told embarrassing stories about college. Emily's maid of honor gushed about their perfect love story. Richard Whitmore spoke about welcoming Emily into their family, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension that made it clear she was beneath them, but they deigned to accept her anyway. Finally, the microphone was passed to Emily. She stood, champagne glass in hand, glowing in her expensive dress. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began. "This has been the most perfect day of my life." She went on about love and new beginnings, about finding her place in the Whitmore family, about how grateful she was to be surrounded by such elegant, sophisticated people. People who would never embarrass her the way her own mother had. She didn't say those exact words, but everyone in the room understood. When she finished, I stood up. "If I may," I called out, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room, "I'd like to say a few words about my daughter." Emily's face went pale. Nathan half rose from his seat. Richard Whitmore looked apoplectic, but guests were already murmuring appreciatively. What could be more touching than a mother's speech at her daughter's wedding? I walked to the microphone with my gift box, and Emily had no choice but to hand it over. "Thank you," I said, my voice warm and clear. "Looking at my beautiful daughter tonight, I'm reminded of how much she's grown, how much she's learned about what really matters in life." Emily's eyes were wide with terror, but she couldn't move, trapped by social convention and the expectant faces of 150 guests. "Emily has always been ambitious," I continued, "always known what she wanted. And what she wanted was to marry into a family of substance, of wealth, of respectability." Murmurs of approval from the crowd. "So I thought tonight would be the perfect time to give her a wedding gift that truly reflects the values of her new family." I placed the gift box on the table beside me and began untying the ribbon with deliberate slowness. "You see, I've learned so much about the Whitmore family in recent weeks, about their business acumen, their financial success, their commitment to honesty and integrity." The ribbon fell away. I lifted the lid. Inside, clearly visible to the entire room, were dozens of documents, photographs, and financial records. And so, my gift to Emily and Nathan is the truth. I pulled out the first document, a bank statement showing Richard Whitmore's company's bankruptcy filing dated just 3 weeks earlier. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Whitmore family fortune, it turns out, is quite fascinating. Did you know they owe $2.3 million to various creditors? That this beautiful mansion is in foreclosure? That Richard hasn't made a real estate sale in 8 months? Richard Whitmore shot to his feet. "This is preposterous. Security." But I was already pulling out the next document, Nathan's termination letter from his previous job, along with the embezzlement charges that had been quietly dropped in exchange for his resignation. "And Nathan," I said, turning to my new son-in-law who looked like he might vomit. "Such an entrepreneur. Did you know he's stolen from 3 different employers? Or that he owes money to people who break legs when they don't get paid back?" The room erupted in whispers. Phones appeared, recording everything. "But the most interesting part," I continued, pulling out the final piece of evidence. Is this recording of Nathan discussing his plans for after the wedding? I pressed play on a small device, and Nathan's voice filled the room through the sound system. Once I'm married, I'll have access to Emily's trust fund. Her grandmother left her nearly $200,000. We can use that to pay off my debts, and then... Well, let's just say marriage doesn't have to be permanent. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Emily screamed, "You bitch!" she shrieked, lunging toward me. "How dare you ruin my wedding?" Nathan grabbed her arm, but she shook him off violently. "Don't touch me! You lied to me! You all lied to me!" Patricia Whitmore was crying. Richard was red-faced, shouting about lawsuits and slander. Guests were standing, some trying to leave, others pulling out phones to capture the chaos. In the midst of it all, I calmly packed the documents back into my box. "Emily," I said, my voice cutting through the noise, "you told me I wasn't polished enough for this family, that I didn't fit the image you were going for, that I was too embarrassing to have at your wedding." The room fell silent again, everyone straining to hear. But it turns out the only embarrassing thing here is the lies, the greed, the willingness to sacrifice the people who love you for the sake of an illusion. I walked toward the exit, every eye in the room following me. At the door, I turned back. "I hope you and Nathan will be very happy together," I said. "You deserve each other." And then I left, walking out into the cool night air as the sound of chaos erupted behind me. The videos went viral within hours. By the next morning, #wedding exposed was trending on social media. The local news picked up the story. A reality TV producer called asking about documentary rights. I watched it all unfold from my quiet living room, drinking coffee and reading the comments with grim satisfaction. The Whitmore's reputation was destroyed overnight. Richard's remaining clients abandoned him. Patricia resigned from her charity boards in shame. Their country club revoked their membership. Nathan fared even worse. The loan sharks he owed money to didn't appreciate the sudden publicity. He left town within 48 hours, destination unknown, leaving behind divorce papers and empty promises. But Emily lost everything. The wedding vendors came after her for payment when the Whitmores' checks bounced. The dream job at Blackstone and Associates evaporated when Mrs. Blackstone decided she didn't want to be associated with the scandal. Friends who'd envied her wealthy catch suddenly found excuses to avoid her calls. 3 weeks after the wedding, she appeared on my doorstep. She looked terrible, hollow-eyed, wearing jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt. Her beautiful manicure was chipped. Her designer handbag had been replaced by a grocery store tote. "Mom," she said, and for the first time in months, her voice sounded like my little girl again. I didn't invite her in immediately. I stood in the doorway, studying the daughter who'd deemed me too embarrassing to love. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was wrong. About everything. About you, about Nathan, about what matters. I'm so sorry." Part of me wanted to gather her in my arms and forgive her instantly. The mother in me ached to see her pain. But I thought about the text messages, the cruel laughter, the years of sacrifice I'd made that she'd dismissed as pathetic and desperate. "I know you are," I said finally, "but sorry doesn't undo the damage, does it?" "I need help," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I have nowhere else to go. The debt collectors are calling constantly. I lost my apartment. I lost everything." "That must be terrible for you," I replied, my voice neutral. "To lose everything you thought mattered." She looked up at me, hope flickering in her eyes. "But Emily," I continued, "I'm just not sure you fit the image I'm going for anymore. My friends are very particular about appearances. They prefer people who value loyalty and family over money and status. You're not exactly polished enough." The hope died in her eyes as I echoed her own words back to her. "Please," she begged. "I'll do anything. I'll work 3 jobs. I'll pay you back every penny you ever spent on me. I'll prove that I've changed." I was quiet for a long moment, letting her stand there in the uncertainty I'd lived with for weeks. "Perhaps," I said finally, "but trust, once broken, is very hard to repair. You taught me that." I closed the door, leaving her standing on the porch where she'd grown up playing hopscotch and selling Girl Scout cookies. Later that evening, I watched from my window as she walked slowly down the street, carrying her life in that grocery store tote bag. I felt many things in that moment. Sadness for the relationship we'd lost, regret for the path that had led us here, but also something else. Justice. Now Emily knew exactly what it felt like to be unwelcome, to be rejected by someone who was supposed to love you unconditionally, to discover that the people you trusted had been laughing at you behind your back. It was a harsh lesson, but perhaps a necessary one, because sometimes the only way to learn the value of genuine love is to lose it through your own choices. And sometimes the only way to teach someone about respect is to show them what it feels like to live without it. My daughter wanted to marry into a world of appearances and shallow values. Well, she got exactly what she asked for. Now she was learning what that world did to people who were no longer useful. The phone rang, breaking my reverie. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick it up. "Mom?" Emily's voice was small, broken. "I'm at the bus station. I don't have anywhere to go." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 23 years of motherhood. "Come home," I said quietly. "We'll figure it out." Because that's what real love does, even when it's been betrayed, even when it's been tested beyond endurance. It endures, but it also remembers. And Emily would spend the rest of her life working to rebuild what she'd so carelessly thrown away. She'd learn the difference between earning someone's love and simply expecting it. It would be the most valuable lesson she'd ever receive. And it was my final gift to the daughter who'd once thought I wasn't good enough to be seen with her. What would you have done if your own daughter banned you from her wedding? Would you have walked away? Or would you have taught her a lesson she'd never forget, like I did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If you enjoy stories of betrayal and revenge, make sure to like this one and subscribe. I post new tales daily. And if you think this was wild, wait until you watch the story that's just popped up on the screen now. Don't miss it.